Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sapadantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gauram Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Thank you so much, dear Rukmini, for opening up with some prayers.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, this is such a delight to have you back for our second talk of the Heart of the Sacred Feminine series. We had such a wonderful response to our first one, and a lot of people asked wonderful questions and had great insights and gems that they gathered. So we're going to continue these conversations with Rukmini Devi Dasi, and just see what else, what other things we can uncover together and other inspirations we might be able to share with you all on your own spiritual journeys. So I do hope that, if you didn't get a chance to listen to the first one, maybe take a moment and go back. You can find that on all of the stations where this is being posted, both as a podcast and as a video on YouTube. So the first one, we really kind of opened up the conversation and talked about what is bhakti, what is the role of the goddess and the sacred feminine in bhakti yoga, and then just some of the basic tenets that I think are pretty relevant to most spiritual practices that a lot of people found resonant. So you can have a listen back to that. Today's talk is called The Delightful Practice, Walking the Path of Bhakti. And we're going to talk a little more in detail about the specific practices that are part of the spiritual tradition. And we hope that it will help you in whatever spiritual path you're following, whether it's a bhakti path or not. I think a lot of these tips can be used universally. So I'd like to welcome back Rukmini Devi Dasi and share a little bit of her background with you for those of you who might not have listened to the first talk or who might not be familiar with her work. So Rukmini is the founder of the Urban Devi Collective, based out of the Bhakti Center in New York City. She is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Bhakti Vedanta College in Belgium and Sabha, a 30-person international committee that advises the governing body of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Rukmini has been traversing the path of bhakti for most of her life, living in India, Canada, and the United States as one of the first disciples of Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, who first brought the path of bhakti to the West in 1965. She is featured in the film Women of Bhakti. She writes, teaches, leads workshops and retreats internationally, and is the mother of a very talented kirtan artist who I would recommend all of you check out and listen to, named Gauravani. And she also leads Vaishnav community discussions and a Christian dialogue and Vaishnava Muslim dialogue each year. So she really loves has a really wonderful respect and understanding of many different religions and cultures around the world. She sees the world animated by spirit and practices and eco-bhakti, seeing truth and beauty in nature and in the world as kindred spirits. So welcome back, Rukmini.
Thank you so much. Such an honor to be with you. So much gets churned in conversation. So I'm really happy to be with you and share this time. Thank you.
Oh, of course. It's really my pleasure. And yeah, I think you're, like you said, there's been a lot of, I think, churning that happened in the first discussion. And to start us off, I wanted to talk about a friend of mine who has been a longtime yoga practitioner. She listened to the first talk and she was so inspired by everything you had to say about spirituality and this path. She's in a place in her life right now where she's really aching for a more spiritual way of living. And I think, like a lot of people, there's a lot of challenges that she's finding. She has 2 children, she works full time. And so she was just asking me questions about how to, how can she engage in this practice? And specifically, she asked me about community. Where are these people? Where do I find them? And I thought it was so interesting because I think for many of us, women in particular, community is often an entryway for spiritual experience. I know a lot of women seek out yoga classes, retreats, and group experiences where they can kind of show a little bit more of their vulnerable side and find in that collective experience community and safety, and that cocoon or sanctuary where they can then explore these deeper practices. So I thought perhaps you could start us off, talking a little bit about the role of community in Bhakti Yoga, and maybe sharing with the listeners some resources and communities where they might be able to find this support.
Wonderful. Thank you for a great question. Yeah, community is so sacred and so important. And we are social beings, even spiritually, according to the path of bhakti. We're spiritual beings. And I love that Dr. Martin Luther King used this term, the sacred, beloved community, the beloved community. So yeah, our global village has become so impersonal and big, and sometimes we can lose our place in that big global, internet kind of not so much family. But there are resources. We have an international urban Devi community. You can look at urbandevi.com or Rukmini Walker at Facebook. And in those forums, we share our poetry, musings, realizations, art. And then when we're not in the midst of a COVID pandemic, we do have retreats as well. So you're so welcome to join us. And, of course, now there's also a daily class from Bhakti Center that's comes over Zoom. And I think, Ashley, you're going to be sharing that link. So every morning at 7:15, there's a Bhakti Center class and discussion in Srimad Bhagavatam. And it was beautiful this morning. I gave that class at different speakers every day. But this morning, there was such a lovely group of women participating and sharing their feedback and their realizations. So it's a beautiful experience. And then there's Wisdom of the Sages, which happens every day, different times according to where you are in the world, in the country. So I think small daily deposits, just like you would put a deposit of money into the bank. So those daily deposits of hope-giving inspiration are so enchanting, illuminating, and uplifting to our hearts. So that's really important that we do that each day. And also at the same time, be gentle with yourself. We're both imperfect living beings, and we're also sacred living beings. So be gentle on the path and take step by step gradually. And we're just meant to reciprocate love, to give and receive love as these individual, eternal, spiritual beings, and to share that in sacred community. And I think it's important to remember that whatever gifts I have are given to me by God. Whatever I give back in community is my gift to God and to community. So those gifts are meant to be received and also shared, horizontally and vertically, to give back as an act of gratitude in the world and to God by whatever name. So yeah, few thoughts.
Yeah, and I love this the image of the daily deposits, because it's true. I mean, I know for myself, I've gone through dry spells, but whenever I'm really watering those seeds daily, and it can be small things, but those drops in the bucket, they really do add up. And you mentioned that the class from the Bhakti Center is early in the morning. And I know often Wisdom of the Sages, they record early in the morning. So, I think starting your day ideally with those drops in your well, so that way you're filled with something transcendental that you can then carry and, like you said, share horizontally and vertically. That will carry you a far ways if you can just dig in and find that consistency. So thank you for sharing those resources, and I'll be sure to post those in the description so that people can find them.
And it's so important that in the early morning, it's a very sacred time. In India, it's called Brahma Muhurta, the time before sunrise. If you can try to get to sleep early, get your little ones tucked in early if you have little ones, and before the whole world is running around, before I'm running around, to have that sacred time to when it's still dark, even to light a candle, to light some incense, and to have that sacred time for deep reflection is so important before charging on out on all the demands of the day. And I was also thinking, I was reminded, how flowers bloom. I know you're an herbalist and plants are so important to you, but have you ever watched that slow motion photography? Is it called Carillion photography? Where you can see the flower opening a little bit, but then it closes again a little bit, and then it opens a little more, and then it closes. And so it's not just charging out, it's opening, but then it's reflecting back, and then opening a little more, and then reflecting back. So I think that's a great image for how to grow spiritually. This is how nature grows, right? So that's really important, I think. Also having time for personal reflection, and then to share the gifts of that reflection.
Yeah. So how might you recommend that? So we've given some resources for community groups, but just, thinking about my friend, and, she works full time, she wakes up early, and then she, takes public transport into DC to work, and then takes public transport home. So, her days are pretty full. So what are some, maybe some bite-sized practices like that, that little kind of pulsation of the opening and closing might you recommend for someone who's in that position, or who's just maybe getting started with these practices?
Yeah, so that is so key, to try to get to sleep early, tuck everyone in early, get the whole tribe to get in the routine of going to sleep early, because those early morning hours are so precious. And then chanting on beads. Before the little ones get up, I wanted to show you my personal set of beads. These are Tulsi beads. Tulsi is a goddess in the form of a plant. You can find Tulsi beads online. You can call it Tulsi chanting beads or Tulsi Japa, Japa beads. We keep them in a little bag like this to keep them clean. So to have that sacred private time yourself before the little ones come up, and to quietly, that contemplation of chanting the sacred names of God on each bead. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. And that mantra, which means mind deliverance, it's just composed of the names of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. It's so beautiful. So, and then regarding the kids, I think it's so beautiful to teach them the joy of singing, because this mantra I just showed you, Japa, but it's also sung in kirtan. So you mentioned my son Gauravani. There's beautiful kirtans you can find online by the beautiful, I would call her a feminine goddess, Janavi Harrison. And play them at home and learn to sing them with your kids and dance with your kids. And this is such a joyous beginning of a bhakti practice at home. show them how much you love them, and show how much Krishna loves them. And I was thinking how it says in the Psalms, praise the Lord with loud cymbals and drums. So, dance and bang some pots and just celebrate. This is a beautiful practice that kids can, it's so accessible for little ones, and then reading and telling stories, acting out stories, make it fun and make it accessible to them. Child stories of child saints on the path of bhakti, talking animals and character building examples of stories to share, how to be kind, how to share. There's so many lovely children's books on sites like krishna.com and so many others. I think there's so many silly books for kids that really teach them nothing. But then there are also character building bios of great women and great men, and for children, but also we're so-called big adults. We also need role models to be a beacon of light in the sky of our lives. And role models from so many cultures, from so many centuries. Search them out and share them with your little ones. And teach them to give and help feed homeless people, or do something to help someone less fortunate. When we had our stores, we always used to pass out cookies at Christmas. We always had little ginger candy in a basket by the register that was offered to Krishna. I'll talk about that also. Food offered to Krishna. But we always shared that. And we always had a little girl who would come, and her mother was teaching her so beautifully to give and to share. And she grew up to be a beautiful social activist. And she used to stand in the door of our store and pass out cookies in a very gracious way. And people were always so charmed by that. So yeah, this idea of make a sacred altar space with your children and get them involved. Make it their own, make it your own, make it beautiful. Light candles in the morning and decorate it with flowers, and teach them how to offer incense or a flower or a little lamp every day if you can. And then you can put on that altar whatever is sacred and precious to you, beautiful pictures of Krishna and Radha, or any form of divinity that inspires you. Make that sacred space is very, very important. And it will make such a deep impression in the hearts of your children. They'll carry that with them for their whole lives. That will always be with them. That sacred, in Sanskrit, it's called sanskara, that impression. It's like a deep groove in the consciousness that they'll carry with them always. That sacred morning time, And then, I wanted to share this other very sacred, important bhakti practice is to cook vegetarian food. So no fish, no meat, no eggs, and then put it on a special plate. Cook something that you and your family love, put it on a special plate, and then in simple devotion, offer it back to the one who gave it, and explain to your kids, we're doing this out of gratitude because we came here with nothing. And now in gratitude, we offer it back to the one who gave to us. And then while offering, you can ask one of your kids to ring a bell, and you can call the Lord with that bell, and then offer it by chanting this Hare Krishna mantra. And you can also teach them to repeat that sacred mantra. And then in humility, Krishna will be pleased to accept that humble offering. And then after you take it off the altar, give the Lord a little time to eat, right? And then after you take it off the altar, then it's considered blessed. It's called prasad, or mercy. So then it's sacred food, and it benefits anyone who tastes it. Take some prasadam cookies or whatever, ginger candy or anything, put it on your desk at work, and have your kids share it at school. And this is all, these are all practices of bhakti. And when someone receives that kind of mercy or blessing, there's a Sanskrit phrase called agyata sukriti, which means unknowing spiritual progress just by tasting that sacred food or smelling a sacred flower. Yeah, share it in your neighborhood. These are important practices of bhakti. So simple, and I think it's so beautiful that singing, dancing, stories, feasting on sacred food, this is all the joyful practice of bhakti, and it's so easy that a little child can do it. And so sometimes people don't even take it seriously, that it's so easy, it can't really transform my heart, right? And even sometimes you can see a dog will be dancing in the kirtan, which is so beautiful, right? And sometimes it's said that the practice of bhakti is like homeopathic medicine, that it's so simple. You think, well, how could this be healing my malady? It's just a little sugar tablet, right? But it's so simple, it's not taken seriously, but it is transforming the heart through that mood of simple devotion. Moving the heart to love.
I love that. There's, when you're speaking all of this, I mean, this really leads us to, the title of our talk, the delightful practice. And so that was a very intentional title, because I think for many of us, we think that our spiritual practices are something that are like obligatory, or, they're going to be challenging and cumbersome and, going to take too much time. But on this feminine path of bhakti, we really have this opportunity to shift the narrative. Instead of thinking of these as things that we have to do, as things that we are blessed to do, and things that can not only create sort of a culture of gratitude in our home, but also can create a culture of gratitude in our own hearts and in the way that we engage with our spiritual life. So maybe you could talk a little bit about this idea of delight and delightful practice and the mood, and how can we adopt these practices in a way that will truly delight our spirit?
Beautiful. Thank you so much. There are two ways to live our life, our lives. One way is that nothing is a miracle, and one other attitude is that everything is a miracle. So that to honor that sense of wonder, that sense of delight. And this is bhakti. These are the pauses to recognize the gifts that are coming to me at every moment. That if I'm charging around without that consciousness, without noticing, we have to notice more. That everything is a miracle. Every moment is another miracle. Even a little bug crawling in my garden is another miracle. So this daily cultivation of this delightful practice of bhakti, as you're calling it, it's like little drops of water wearing away the stone, or the stone heart. So we can live our lives almost in a robotic way, or almost as victims. Oh, now I have to do this. Now I have to do this. Now I have to do this. Oh, now I have to get my kids. Oh, those kids. They're driving me crazy. Or, think of them as sacred emissaries. You are, if you have kids, you are building the future. You're cultivating the future. And these little sacred angels going off into the future that we'll never see. So this is delightful. It's a dance of love. It's a dance of loving reciprocation between ourselves and that all loving source of ourselves. And I love the image that at the center of all existence is this love affair between the sacred feminine and sacred masculine, Radha and Krishna. And that, just like kids are born from their parents' love, we're born from that love, and we're meant to reciprocate that love. They give, we give back. It's like a dance. It's like the rhythm and the harmony of a dance. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to be part of that sacred dance of love, dancing in harmony, dancing in reciprocation, in a mood of gratefulness, humility, simplicity, and to give and to receive in loving service. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the dance and this reciprocation because, I grew up Catholic and it really felt like a one-way street. It was, you do your rosary, you say your prayers, you do penance, and God is up there judging and making sure you're doing it all right. And as a child, I just, I didn't understand the mercy. Like, how is this? Where's the mercy? I don't see it. And in this path, there's such an interaction, this two-way street where I wake up in the morning and I light the candles and the incense and I offer the food and I feel there's such beauty and smells, and it's creating such a lovely environment. I'm receiving so much benefit from that. Physiologically, my nervous system is calming, everything is relaxing. And then in the act of offering, now the food has been blessed. And it sounds, I remember in the beginning when I first heard this idea of like, this food is blessed by God, I was like, well, is it real? Like it was hard for me, my mind, to wrap around it. But once I started actually the practice of offering it and taking that time to say the mantra, and then taking a step back and giving some time and space for the deities or God to receive that. And my girls now, it's so sweet because I'll ring the bell and say the chants, and then I'll say Gaur Primanandi, and then they'll call from the other room, Haribol, which means dance, God, dance. And it's so joyful, and they love yelling Haribol, which is basically they're acknowledging God's gotten fed. God has received our offering. And so now let's rejoice. Let's celebrate that. And then we'll take the food back and then, bring it to the table. And so there is such a joyfulness in that feeling of it being this reciprocation and this dance between us and God.
Yeah, and what you're bringing up for me that's so beautiful, that's important to share about the path of bhakti, is that all of our senses are meant to be engaged in this practice. The sense of smell, the beautiful sight of a light offered, the sense of taste, the hearing, the voice, all is so, rather than shutting down our senses and becoming like robots, they're all meant to be engaged because they're all meant to be offered to the source of the senses. So bhakti is not about negating, but really about celebrating these gifts. And another thing I just wanted to mention, so it's almost like you said you grew up Catholic, so that holy sacrament that you receive in the church, this prashad is like holy sacrament, but at home every day. Everything I eat should be holy sacrament. Wow. And another thing I wanted to say is that, there was a theologian, Houston Smith, who made a beautiful statement that the mystics of any tradition are the impatient ones. And I think it's important to understand that ordinary traditional religion, go to church, go to temple, go to mosque, can be very robotic in all traditions, even the traditions, or maybe even especially the traditions of India, but the mystics of all traditions are the ones who are eager for it, and they want to pour their heart into it, and they want to do it with love. So when I think of my favorite Catholics, like Gira Gardner, Ashley, so think of Teresa of Lisieux, she's a little girl saint, and seeing angels in her garden, So yeah, it's important to honor those sacred mystic voices of all traditions because they're there. And it's maybe they don't use the term bhakti, but it's bhakti by another name. So this bhakti, which means giving back or reciprocation in love and devotion or loving service, is the essence of all religion. Religion can be very dead. It can be very, calcified, but it's meant to be like a volcanic eruption in the heart. It's meant to be on fire. But then what happens is after some time, after the saints have passed on or whatever, it becomes cold and hard and calcified. So now it's our job to awaken that river of fire, of love, in our hearts and in the hearts of others. I think that's angelic work. That's what we can be messengers in this world, doing that work and setting the world on fire with love.
Yeah. And as you're speaking, I was thinking about my grandmother, who is a very devout Catholic, but a very mystic Catholic. And, Jesus to her is like her best friend. She talks to Jesus and whispers and prays to him and loves him and has pictures of him just joyfully around her home. And Mother Mary is the way she speaks about them, it reminds me so much of the great devotees of this lineage in Bhakti, because there's this personalism, this idea that Jesus is close to me and Jesus loves me. And I just, I've always loved that about I didn't understand it really until I started practicing Bhakti. And I was like, oh, it's the same thing. She is infatuated with Jesus and cries when she speaks about him. She has so much love in her heart. It's so moving. And, I think that we can be moved in that way, like you said, in any of these faith practices, if we have that fire under us. And, what I didn't have growing up was practices at home. And now that I have these daily practices, I can teach my kids, and that I can do daily. I don't have to, I'd love to go to a temple and receive the community piece, but I can do that and stoke that fire on my own at home. And I think that's such a gift of this lineage.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, when we become sophisticated adults, we become so intellectual and in our heads and so over sophisticated. But my teacher, Prabhupada, he would say Bhakti is so simple that I love this phrase, any simple, unsophisticated person can understand it. So usually we use the word sophisticated in a positive sense, but, we become over sophisticated, over intellectual, and we lose that heart space, that sense of wonder. So if we can learn to balance, we may be very brilliant theologians or brilliant IT people or brilliant attorneys or teachers or whatever, but if we can keep that simplicity of the heart and approach with a simple gratitude and love, then we will reap those rewards of that simplicity, and our head and our heart will be integrated.
Yeah. And we can feel that in people, it's like when you meet someone in your life who has that, that devotion and that love, and it can be a child, it can be a middle-aged, it can be an elder person, but it's this universal feeling or mood that they carry. And,
So true.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that, we can feel that and see that. But
I feel that your grandmother, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, but we have to develop, we have to have our own practices so we can even see those things.
Right. To be able to shine back, to reflect that. And I almost feel like your grandmother planted a seed of devotion in your heart that, not everybody has that. And we meet those people in our day. As I said this morning, I gave the class at Bhakti Center, and I asked the moderator of the class, I said, how are you today? And he said, I'm happy by choice. So beautiful. And it reminds me when we had our store in the airport in Denver, Colorado, there was this really simple Baptist lady who was cleaning the bathrooms, and the big executives used to come and sometimes ask her advice on their problems in their lives, so they're making the big fat incomes, and she was a simple lady. And when you would ask her, how are you? She would always say, I'm blessed. Today I'm blessed. And she said it with so much conviction always, that you felt that she was extending that blessing to you as well. And to me, that's Bhakti. She would have never known the term Bhakti, but that's Bhakti.
Yeah. Yeah. And the seed of devotion, I mean, it's something that, it's like it's such a mystery in some ways. Like, how did we even get this? How did this even come into, some of us might even ask the question, how am I even here listening to this podcast or this, this talk? Like, but there's this seed that, I think, maybe like your teacher said, is sort of inherent in all of us.
Yeah.
What a gift it is that, that we can water it and we can cultivate it. And,
Yeah.
I think, one thing that I'm so blessed that when my husband started practicing bhakti yoga in DC was like, kind of, you said homeopathic, he would come home with these things and he would teach me slowly over time. And so, I started getting these little bite-sized pieces of the practice, which was good for me because I think at that moment I was pretty closed off to formal practices. I just was overwhelmed and burned out from having a family, running a business. I just was like, I can't take on anything new. But it was this sort of small titration of him bringing this into the home that softened me over time. And now, we are full-fledged practitioners. So I would have never guessed this 3 years ago. So I think the simplicity of the practices is, I think, one of those parts that make this so unique. So, maybe could you talk, what are the core practices, maybe that people can't take on right now, but what would be some of the, what would be the main things that people could maybe start to look out for in the future, of different ways they could deepen this practice?
Can I just go back to what you said about seeds, though, first of all, because it's such a beautiful image that like, you can't teach a child to walk if they didn't have that innate capacity to walk within them. So that capacity to love is innate within us. It's in an undeveloped or kind of embryonic state. And those seeds of bhakti are given, it's described that they're given by a combination of grace of God and some devotee on the path. So I'm feeling like perhaps your husband brought home some little seeds, and perhaps your grandmother, gave you some little seeds. But those seeds that, so we're talking about bhakti. Bhakti is, love is a verb, right? So bhakti is a cultivation. My teacher translated the word bhakti as devotional service. So it's an active cultivation, just like having a garden. You want to start with a seed, hopefully an heirloom seed that's been handed down, that's very precious. And then you don't want to just throw it into some hard, rocky soil with tons of concrete in it from the last construction. You have to get some good, rich earth, which is the, which is the foundational wisdom that comes from people who've come before us. And a garden has to have very careful boundaries so that no one's going to come in and trample that little seed. Sometimes we have to start a seed inside the house until it's a little bit bigger. So that those boundaries and the good rich earth, and then the watching for weeds of desires that can be harmful, like a desire for pride or greed or ego or envy, and practices that can be harmful to spiritual consciousness. And and then the idea of that sunshine of illumination, of appropriate light from hearing from wisdom sources, and then the blessing of the grace of rainfall, and then that quiet contemplation of resting and pause in the evening and the moonshine. Actually, there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that the moon gives the taste of the sweet taste in the vegetables. Isn't that something?
Oh, I love
and
that.
Actually, I think that is beautiful. And I have this one god sister, she's very intellectual, and she asked our guru once, she said, Prabhupada, how is it that the moon gives the taste, that sweet taste to the vegetables? And Prabhupada said, such a childlike way, he said, why don't you ask him? That's so charming, So yeah, this bhakti is a cultivation. So these practices, I like the image of a garden. So the practices are like a watering process, the daily chanting. Okay, so sometimes, we're imperfect living beings. We're trying our best. Sometimes we miss, just like when you have a little plant you're growing. Okay, today I forgot to water it, but I won't beat myself up over that. I'll try again. Just little drops of grace and gratitude to my own efforts. Also, being gentle with ourselves, so that there are 5 practices actually that are considered most important. You asked me what are my favorites, and there are 5 that are so important on the path of bhakti, and let me share those with you. So the first one is keeping friendship with holy people. We all know that we have people in our lives who drag us down, and we can kind of, distance ourselves a little bit from those influences. So keeping some company of holy people, and sometimes that company is just by hearing, maybe even on a Zoom call, or by reading something uplifting, some bio about some great personality. My husband and I have been listening to an audiobook about Harriet Tubman, the great, she worked for the Underground Railroad, bringing these slaves up from the South, from Maryland, where we live. And so, inspiring bios about great people like that. This is sadhu sanga, by hearing or in person or however. And the next one is chanting the holy name on beads, that japa beads. So that mantra, maybe you can post the whole mantra, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So chanting on beads and keeping a certain number, even if that number is just 1. Sometimes we become over enthusiastic and do too much, and then the next day I'm burnt out and beating myself up. No, just do 1 each day before charging out to your job, or before the kids are up. So that's very, very important. Hearing and reading from wisdom texts like Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, or tuning into the Bhakti Center class, Wisdom of the Sages. Honoring the sacred form of the Lord in pictures or in a deity form. Maybe you have a very beloved picture of Krishna and Radha, or even Jesus if you're a Christian, whatever inspires your heart. I had a beautiful picture I just sent to a friend. He practices bhakti, but he's also a very devout Christian. And I have this beautiful picture of, it was carved by a Christian man in wood, very, very big, maybe 4 feet tall. But it's a picture of Jesus. It's a carving, a sculpture, Jesus on the cross, but he's reaching down and embracing this sort of every man or every woman figure. So you've got Jesus and they like ourselves, right? In this embrace of Jesus. So, whatever inspires you should go on your altar. And then to make your home, this is number 5 now, to make your home a sacred space with these practices, and don't allow influences that really bring you down. Make your home a sacred space. This is the number 5. And that having that alone time in the morning, I can't emphasize that enough. I know whenever I get to bed too late, which sometimes happens, it just affects my next day. So having that alone time, sacred time for growing wisdom, growing discernment, melting the stone heart with those drops of water, those watering those seeds of bhakti is so important. And hearing from those who are more wise than I am, so important.
Yeah, I think the female and the feminine part of this conversation, that is, like a salve, I think, to a lot of people who have had wounds from religion and not living up to these standards, is the idea of the grace and the slowness we can take with the cultivation of these practices. And I love the metaphor of the garden and the weeds, because, what are the weeds? Is it that late night show that keeps you up late so you don't do your practices? Is it your phone flipping through Instagram? What is it that is the weed in your life that might be keeping you from doing the things that your heart is calling you to do? And that there's no judgment and there's no shame in that. There shouldn't be no guilt in that. You just simply say, oh, I see that. And let me just redirect. And tomorrow I will start chanting again. I'll start watering these seeds again. And that's such
you're reminding me of the Beatles song. I'm thinking of the image. Why are people all over the world attracted to Mother Mary? In churches all over the world, they're attracted to Mother Mary, and that Beatles song, Let It Be. Just let it be. I try. I offer you this day, this day, this is the day the Lord hath made, right? And I always say to my husband in the evening, because he's quite a workaholic, and I always say to him, this is the day the Lord hath made, and this is the day the Lord hath ended.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, so just let it be, let it be. I'm going to try. I'm not going to beat myself up over all the mistakes I made. And that's the grace of the sacred feminine. I think it's very, very beautiful. That grace, again, I mentioned last time, bhakti is a descending process. There are other spiritual practices that are ascending practices that I have to perfect that pose, or have to perfect that Sanskrit chanting, or whatever it is. Bhakti is a descending process, like grace flows down. So let's enter into that flow of grace and be bathed, be washed of all the inebrities, of all the obstacles on the path.
Yeah. And I think too, the one thing that is so nice about this path is that it can change over time. And I'm just curious to hear, has your experience of this practice changed over the years? And is that pretty common for people on this path?
Yeah, I think it's natural. I think we see our heart opening in certain ways. I long for discernment. I long for wisdom. And I would say that I'm less judgmental than I was in earlier days. And I'm trying to honor wherever someone is along the path. And that's fine. And, to try to catch people doing it right. Try to catch your kids doing it right. So often we're, what's this? See on the report card? No, catch, oh, 3 A's. Oh my goodness, So catch ourselves doing it right. Like, wow, I just chanted one mantra that I actually heard in my heart. Wow, even though every other one, my mind has been flying all around the universe, worrying about this and that and the other thing, and how I'm going to do this and how I'm going to do that. But if I can just catch one holy mantra in my mind and heart, then that's it's actually like when I chant one mantra, it's like offering a little flower. So these beads, these Tulsi beads, are actually shaped like these little mogra flowers. Have you ever seen a jasmine? Well, jasmine in India is called mogra. So those little jasmine flowers, before they pop open, they kind of look like these little beads. So when I chant a mantra, I'm thinking, yes, I'm offering this flower. And now I focus on the next one. I'm not going to worry about the last one. I'm not going to worry about what comes next in this chanting or in my day. I'm just going to try to offer this one little flower, and again, this next little flower. I wanted to share, because you've got some mommies out there, I wanted to share a really beautiful story that I heard from, I think, a very realized mama. And she, I love this story. She was chanting on her beads, and she had a baby, and she found that it was a really good time when she was breastfeeding her baby, that she could sit and chant some rounds. We call it rounds, going around on each bead. So she could chant while she was breastfeeding her daughter every day with such concentration. And it was such a sacred time between herself and her daughter, and between herself and that sacred mantra. And she used to do that every day. And then once, when her daughter started walking, her daughter was running around furiously looking for her mother's what we call Japa beads, these beads. And the mom, she couldn't understand, why is she running all over the house looking for my beads? And then the little girl found her mama's beads, and she grabbed the beads and she jumped in her mother's lap. She wanted to breastfeed. She wanted that snuggling, and she wanted that comfort of breastfeeding with her mom. But she didn't think she could do it without those beads, because her mother was so accustomed to chanting with the beads whenever she would breastfeed. So those two came together. So isn't that a beautiful sacred impression? Like, again, that word sanskar, that sacred groove that's there in the heart of this little child that she can carry with her and share with her own, children.
Oh.
So I love that story. Isn't that beautiful?
It's so beautiful. And yeah, you just never know how these things are going to, affect and inscribe themselves. And yeah, it reminds me of just a little story from my own mothering experience. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And, I like to wake up early when it's quiet and the girls are not, and I can set up the altar and do my japa in very quiet, dark settings. And so for a while, when my kids would wake up, I would put on a little gentle movie for them so that I could sit quietly. But then, one day I decided, you know what, I'm going to take I think she was 2 at the time, in with me. And so I was just holding her and doing my rounds and rocking. And it was like, I was like, this is way better. Like my mantra, like my japa was better. And my daughter was much happier because she was with mama and she was getting this. And so then the next morning, she came down quietly. She didn't scream for me. So I had to go upstairs. She actually just walked down on her own, found me in the altar room and sat in my lap and was just like, okay, this is what we're going to do now. And so that, for a while that became, a little ritual we had. And
beautiful.
It's just amazing how when you as a mother put those things first, how your children, they really honor and value that, and they begin to see the beauty and the sanctuary that creates in the home.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You're sending off, what you're doing is teaching them to meditate, teaching them to pray, teaching them to gratitude and to say thank you. You're creating little angels and sending them off into the future as emissaries to the future. So these are our gifts to the future when we can raise children like that. As opposed to thinking, this child's a big distraction. And
that's what I did. That's what I was doing at the beginning. I was just like, what can I do to keep them entertained? But, I had to really dig in and say, okay, there's another option here. There's a more gentle, loving, way to be in this moment. And it took, I had to dig in, but, once I did it, I was like, wow, this is actually a lot easier. So it's funny how we can talk ourselves out of sometimes the easiest solutions.
Yes, that's beautiful. And those are the impressions that you carry with you. Those are the impressions you have of your grandmother. Mm-hmm. And that so many people have of those sacred influences in their lives, those little moments when the reality parts and we have those little moments of grace. So wonderful. Thank you so much.
Now, are there maybe any other stories that you could share with us? I think I learned so much through story, and I'm sure our listeners do too. So any other stories you'd like to share regarding daily practices or influences of bhakti on people and their spiritual paths?
Yeah, I'll share a couple things. One little story, it seems really quaint, but my Guru Prabhupada mentions it in one of his Bhagavad Gita purports or commentaries, but it's this little quaint story of a mother bird. She was a little sparrow, and she laid her eggs on the bank of on the sand of the beach, and then the big ocean came and washed. This is what I've been thinking about since the beginning of the year, actually. Just so the big ocean came and washed her eggs away, and she went to the ocean and she said, "Give me back my eggs." And the ocean just ignored her. She was so tiny and he was so great. And then she just started, she was so determined and loving as a mama. She just started taking these little beakfuls of water, and she's told the ocean, "I'm going to empty you of all your water. And she started taking little beakfuls of water out of the ocean, and one by one, with such determination and such, such dedication. And then what happened was Lord Vishnu's big bird carrier, gigantic heavenly eagle form called Garuda, he saw the determination of his little sister bird. My Prabhupada says, he saw this determination in his little sister bird. And so then he went to the ocean. He said, if you don't give her back her eggs, I, Garuda, am going to empty you out. And so then the ocean got scared and gave her back her eggs. So I've been thinking about this quite a lot, that, since New Year's Day, thinking of New Year's resolutions, and, that can get so superficial. But I was thinking, my tiny little drops, my tiny little beakfuls of whatever I can offer each day, one little mantra or one little intention or one little expression of gratitude or one little offering of rice and beans or whatever I can do, my little beakfuls of offerings each day are sacred, like that little sparrow bird. So that's one thing I've been thinking about quite a lot. You can share that with your kids.
I will.
And, and then the other thing I just want to share in closing that I think is really, really beautiful. This is a daily meditation that you can say to the Lord, and again, divinity, however you love and see divinity. But it's a meditation you can say when you're closing your eyes at night or in the morning or when you walk by your sacred altar or anytime. But it goes like this, and you can change the names as you like, and maybe you'll be able to share this somehow in the chat or whatever. It goes like this. My dear Lord Krishna, my dear Srimati Radharani, although I've forgotten you for so many long years in this material world, from today, I'm going to begin again. From today, I'm remembering you. My dear Lord, from this day, I am yours. So this is such a beautiful little prayer. And it's actually said in the wisdom books that Krishna says that anyone who says this prayer to him sincerely, that he will award that person courage on the spiritual path, on the path of bhakti. So I think that's really, really powerful, a powerful intention to share, and perhaps you'd like to also take up that little intention, even though yesterday or 5 minutes ago I messed up, but from this moment, I am yours.
That is so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I think it's so nice to feel like, yeah, I can start over at any moment, and I can do, I can offer my little beakful as I can. And I hope that today's talk really gave people, just, more little nuggets, gold nuggets of information and nectar and ideas for practices and ways of engaging in this that are accessible, that aren't overwhelming. And this might be a good talk to listen to maybe a few times. Maybe you bookmark it and listen to it throughout the year so that you might be ready to adopt another practice, a few months from now, or add another few rounds of your mantra chanting a few months from now. Because like Rukmini, you said at the very beginning of this talk, it's adding in those drops. It's adding in, starting your day with those little doses of this devotion that can make such a difference over time. So I thank you so much once again for joining today and for offering such wisdom and grace, and your stories are just so good. So I will be sharing them very, very generously with my children and beyond. And I'm happy to post everything that you shared in the description. So for those of you who are listening, just look in the description for some of the mantras and prayers that we've spoken about. So thank you, Rukmini. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for this very precious conversation. Thank you, Ashley.
My pleasure.
What a joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.